This week's mini tutorial is by request for downward facing dog. So a particular question I got from someone was, my heels don't touch the floor in downward facing dog. Is there anything we can do about that? Yes, there is, but it's something that's going to happen over a period of time. So we'll go through the basics of your downward facing dog and what you can do to make it suit your body best, because we're all going to have a slightly different experience in the posture. First of all, entering downward dog. A few teachers have different ways of doing this. The way I find best is just being a 4-point kneeling, and then just take the hands, rather than under the shoulders, just take them slightly in front. Tuck the toes under and then lift up, and that should be a relatively good downward dog. If you need to step your feet further away or further in and that feels more comfortable, then go ahead, and that's fine to do too. So in your downward dog, just take a moment to notice where your weight distribution is. So are you mostly in the hands, or are you mostly in the feet, or do you think you're in between the two? Ideally you want to be in between the two. If you're not sure, a good way of working it out is, if you find that your shoulders get really tired when you're in your downward dog, you're probably loading too much weight into the shoulders. And this could be because you've got some tightness in the hips or in the hamstrings, and you find that the weight distribution all comes forwards into the shoulders because you just can't get far enough back, and you can't get your bottom far enough to the ceiling in order to evenly distribute the weight. So if you do find that, there's a few things you can do. So if your feet are sort of up like this and your heels are up, and you find you're a bit rounded and you sort of come forward a bit like this, there is going to be more energy in the shoulders. So I would suggest bend the knees and just work the tummy towards the thighs. So it's better to come into that back stretch, and you'll probably find the weight distribute slightly further back towards the legs. And then over time you just work the legs straighter, and eventually the heels would come down towards the floor. Also, what can help is taking the feet slightly wider than hip distance. If you have tightness in the hamstrings and the back of the hips, sometimes you might find that helps. Also, for those of you that are quite mobile in the upper back, you might find that what ends up happening is the chest comes almost too far back and you sort of end up almost folding in half. That's an awful lot to put through your shoulders. So just take a moment to focus onto the hands, and just take a moment to roll the elbows forward, so the eyes of the elbows facing either forwards or in, and just push your back, so almost like you're making a cat back. So rather than dipping into the chest, push your shoulder blades apart from each other, so like you're making an angry cat. And those of you that are a bit more mobile might find that this brings more stability to the shoulder area of this posture. And then some people say, well, my teacher said my downward dog was too wide, mine was too narrow. It really depends on the style of yoga that you practice. If you practice Ashtanga yoga, it's usually a shorter dog, so you can create more energy, so you can jump into things. Whereas in other yoga practices, you might be asked to come from a plank and then move to a downward dog, and then maybe back into a plank. If that's the case, you would need a wider downward dog. It's one of those things that you just need to do over time, and it isn't going to be a restful posture for everyone. So if an instructor says, I'll take a rest in downward dog, it might not necessarily be a rest for you. Always feeling free to drop to the knees and to come into child pose or to melting heart if that is the case. I certainly don't mind people doing that in my practice. Things you can do to lengthen your hamstrings so your heels eventually come down to the floor I put a lot of this into my classes, so anything like this is about the best thing you can do to lengthen hamstrings, keeping that movement going, or maybe holding for a little longer, anything like that. And just making sure that you're not rounding into your back when you're coming into it. Keeping the knees soft. I hope this has been helpful, and do let me know what you think of these mini tutorials because I'm pretty new at doing them. Thank you. Namaste.